Hi guys, Eugene here with the Peak Strength seated leg extension and leg curl machine, which I'm going to review for you today. I'll start things off by saying that I am not affiliated with Peak Strength and I bought this machine with my own money to use in my home gym. So before we get too deep into it, let's take a look at some of the basic operations of the machine. So I am going to start with leg extensions. Pull this pop pin, set the adjuster to where I like it. Now, I like to use the last pin on the adjuster because I like to get the maximum range of motion, which is why I also tend to do this exercise without shoes. Grab the grab handles and do my extension movement. All right. Now, let's switch to doing leg curls. Again, I'm going to pull out this pop pin, swing this pendulum, and again for leg curls, I like to use the last pin here to maximize my range of motion, and also because I find it when I want to lock my legs in, I really need to use that last pin in order to get a proper lock in when I use this leg holder clamp here, which also goes to the last pin for me. So now that I am locked in, I can go and do my leg curl movement. And when I'm done, I'm going to unlock, get out, and reset the machine back into a more neutral position. Okay, with that out of the way, let's talk a bit about why I went with this machine and how the purchasing and delivery experience went. After doing quite a bit of research, I learned about the Peak Strength brand mostly through forums and Reddit. And after doing some research, I realized that, there are many machines which are essentially the same base model machine. Many of these are just the white label Alibaba machine. Temple of Gains is a good example of another machine that uses basically the same base machine, but has somewhat higher end finishes and sub-assemblies. But basically you're getting the same stack, frame, and mechanics as you are getting on something like the Temple of Gains machine, minus some of the more premium features such as knurled handles, numbered adjusters. And I know the Temple of Gains ones, for example, has a couple of additional settings here. They'll have a nicer adjuster for the backrest position and so on. However, at the price point where I got this machine was, about 1,800 and change, maybe call it 1,900 if you want to round up, versus the Temple of Gains, which again delivered to my house would have been around 2,400 to 2,500. So do all of those features, combine to being $600 more machine? I am not so sure. So basically, it came down to value for what you get. And I think that for the quality of this machine, it is an excellent value. Now let's talk about what I like about the machine. First, I'll say that the build quality is generally excellent. All of the components feel very sturdy. The welds are clean. Everything aligned perfectly when I was assembling it. At no point did I have to get out the rubber mallet to try to get some bolts to align, which, I can't say for a lot of the more budget machines that I've assembled in the past. The motion of the machine feels very smooth, and it's an amazing deal for the quality of the machine you get. I see a lot of other competitors selling either this exact machine or a derivative of this machine with slightly different finishes for anywhere from $600 more all the way up to $1,200 or $1,300 more. So I don't think you can find anything else in the market that is of a comparable quality for a selectorized combo leg extension leg curl machine compared to this. At $1,900, delivered to your door, I think it's an outstanding value for what you get. Now let's talk a bit about the purchase, delivery, and assembly process. When I decided to purchase the machine, I simply went to Peak Strength's website, I put in the order, and it was shipped the next business day, and it arrived in my house in 3 business days via freight. And I was frankly really impressed by how quickly my order got fulfilled and delivered to my house. As far as the packaging, it came in a big crate. Every part was bubble wrapped. There was no polyurethane or anything like that. And the condition of everything was pretty good, despite me witnessing the delivery guy mishandling the crate and rotating it in a way it wasn't supposed to be. Most of the parts came out unscathed. There were maybe a few scratches on the actual weight plates, but other than that, everything was in good condition. As far as the assembly process, it took me about 5 hours to put this together. And mind you, this is not the first machine I've put together. Now, I'll say most of the delays were due to confusion from the instructions, because they were obviously written by someone whose first language was not English, and there was just generally a lot of confusion in the instructions and a lot of things lost in translation. That being said, if you've put together these sorts of machines before, you'll probably be able to figure it out. I think if the instructions were actually sensible and done by an English speaker, it would have probably taken something like 3 hours. Overall, I was pretty pleased with the purchase, delivery and assembly, and the machine turned out well. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the things that I don't really like about the machine and where I see there's room for improvement. The biggest issue that I'll start with is the strength curve and the amount of felt resistance versus the selected resistance. So if we switch this machine to leg extensions, you take a look at the mechanism, and we'll do a B-roll shot here. You've got this cam, which engages with this pendulum, and it unwinds the cable onto this cam, and that's how it creates resistance. Problem is, this cam is, one, just round and not shaped to create a better strength and resistance curve, and two, the cam is too small. And what that means is when you're using the machine, the felt weight you're getting is actually about 2-to-1 to whatever is selected on the stack. Now, this stack goes up to 264. That means for leg extensions, the maximum resistance you're going to get on this machine without doing something like putting a gym pin on it and trying to add more plates or something on the gym pin is going to be 132 pounds. I have only been doing lifting for about 2 years now. By no means am I the biggest guy out there, but just to, show you this, I've set it to the full stack right now, 264 pounds selected on the machine, and I can do the full stack of the machine, without too much trouble. So if you're used to working with bigger weights and you need more than 132 pounds of resistance for your program, this machine may not give you enough resistance for what you're looking for. Now, I think this is something that could have easily been remedied in the design. All they had to do is make this cam maybe a bit bigger to give you a better resistance ratio, or shape it, or do some other pulley tricks where you can actually leverage more of the stack as felt resistance. That being said, when doing leg curls, let me set this to a slightly lower weight. The way the mechanism works is, instead of this cam engaging the cable, they have this secondary pendulum here, which then pulls out the cable when you're doing the movement. Now, you may also notice that this pendulum goes out further than the cam. And what that does is it actually gives you a better resistance profile for the movement for leg curls than for extensions, because this radius is larger, so there is more, mechanical leverage being exerted. The other difference is because this is just pulling the cable out rather than wrapping it around a cam, you get more resistance at the beginning of the movement than at the end. And if you follow various, fitfluencers like Mike Isertel, he'll tell you that you want to have more resistance at the stretched part of the movement. And this design actually achieves that, whether that's accidental or not. Now, when I've measured the resistance and felt weight for leg curls, the felt weight ratio is actually about 4:3 rather than 2:1. And what that means is if you max out the stack at 264, the maximum resistance you will actually feel is about 200, somewhere between 200 and 210 pounds. And it is going to be a little bit more challenging at the beginning of the movement than towards the end of the movement. So in some ways, I would say this is actually a better seated leg curl machine than it is a leg extension machine. That being said, the flaws don't end there. One thing you may notice is as I get to the end of the movement, the roller ends up hitting this seat frame. So that somewhat limits the range of motion for the exercise. And, I would really encourage them for the next iteration of this machine to figure out how to redesign this component so that you can maximize the range of motion. And, this impacts both movements for the leg curls and leg extensions. So that is my number 2 complaint. And if you watch reviews for some other similar machines like the Temple of Gains ones, generally people seem to have the same complaint. Other nice to haves, which again some other machines have addressed, is it would be nice to have more options for where you can pin the leg holder. I find that I'm somewhere between the kind of last 2 notches here, and the one before the last ends up being too loose, and then the last one is a little too tight. So it's always kind of a weird getting in and out of the machine. So it would be great if there are some more granular options there. And the final thing that could be improved is the seat. The adjuster on the back of the seat here is, basically a tension screw design. So we'll, zoom in on that a bit more. I think they've already mentioned that for the next version, they're looking to making that a pop pin. But also the upholstery itself on the seat is not great. It feels like this is somewhere where they cut corners to lower the cost of the machine. It feels, like a budget end seat. So having a more cushioned and better upholstery material seat would also be an improvement in the machine. And while they're looking at that, another feature that would be really great is if not only they could make the seat slide forward and back, but also give you an option to angle it, because everybody is now trying to emphasize, again, doing your leg extensions in a stretch position. So it would be awesome if I could tilt the seat back to, get a bit more extension in my hips as I do this exercise. Now on to my concluding thoughts about the machine. Overall, I am very happy with my purchase because I think for the cost of the machine, it's an amazing value. So despite all of the flaws and shortcomings that you heard me talk about, I still think this is a great machine, and I'm pleased with my purchase because I don't think there's anything else in the market at a comparable price point that's better. And as you go up, another $500-600, you get something that's, a marginal improvement. And, as far as some of the more, major engineering flaws, like the cam design of the frame, machines that are designed differently that still have a similar stack selectorized design will probably cost north of $3,000. So overall, I give this machine a thumbs up.